What are other ways that you've seen the idea of lifetime value be misused?
I tend to focus on more behavioral distinctions, products they buy, what channels we acquire them through, what kinds of campaigns they respond to. But it is tempting to look for demographics as well. I hear you talk about demographics, but we want to know anyway, how do the demographics distinguish the high value from the low value ones? And we'll go, well, we'd rather not tell you that. And they say, do you want to get paid? Okay, we'll tell you. The problem is those demographic kind of relationships are not very robust. So if you do too much slicing and dicing like that, you're going to find some differences that are you're just kind of capitalizing on noise, but you're taking it as gospel truth and making decisions on the basis of it.
Professor Peter Fader is a professor of marketing at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. He's a leading expert in customer lifetime value, behavioral data, and customer-centric strategy. He has published award-winning research and helped shift how businesses think about their customers. Fader is the co-founder of Theta and Encompass Labs and the author of various books on customer centricity. In today's session, we touched on the different meanings of LTV, how LTV can be misused, why he doesn't like the LTV CAC ratio, how different brands should think about and measure retention and LTV, how you tactically identify high-value customers, probabilistic versus machine learning models, why predictive validity and robustness matter so much in this context, and much more. Professor Fader, it's great to have you. Really excited to have you back on the podcast. People who have been doing marketing science for a while are definitely familiar with you and your work. Anyone who's gone through the Wharton MBA program has probably met you and at least seen your class, if not actually taken it. Maybe to start, I would love sort of just a quick introduction from you on who you are and what your career has been about, and then really what we're going to be talking about today is this idea of LTV or lifetime value and predicted lifetime value in particular. And so if you could share with us an introduction to that topic, what does it mean? What are we talking about when we talk about lifetime value?
Okay, so well, first and foremost, a professor of marketing at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Goodness gracious, I'm in year 39 now, and I've been doing the same thing all that time, just building predictive models of, how many customers will we acquire and how long will they stay and how often will they buy and how much will they spend. And while each of those is an interesting thing by itself, sometimes companies, executives, analysts, investors, they want the whole enchilada. Let's roll all of that stuff up together. And that's lifetime value. So, the formal definition would be the projected future profitability of a customer, and that's great. But sometimes it's more easily understandable if we break it down into its three main components. How long are you going to stay with us? What are you going to do over that horizon? And how much value will you bring when you do it? So whether you're looking at the whole thing or the components, that's the basic idea.
So that makes perfect sense. Sort of this idea of what is the total value to a business of a customer. But when I've sort of talked to companies that are doing this in practice, sometimes that's not exactly what they're talking about. They'll say LTV, and really what they mean is total amount of revenue generated in 1 year. So how do you, tell us a little bit more about when you say projected LTV, what do you really mean? And then what are the ways that this idea has been misconstrued or misused? What are things that it's not?
Yeah, so just from a pure definitional standpoint, it's really great to get this out on the table. Because I have to admit, part of the sloppiness and inconsistency is my fault because I'm just sloppy and inconsistent myself. And so it's really good to get this very clear wording on these things. So there's the historical value. So sometimes people make the distinction between LTV and PLTV, where they'll refer to LTV being historical. How much in your lifetime to date have you spent with us? I guess we could. I'm thinking almost always about the predictive, the forward-looking. Okay, so how much gas is left in the tank, and I have no problem, by the way, talking about say C1V or C5V. What's your lifetime value over 1 or 5 or 10-year horizon? That's fine. In fact, from a practical standpoint, that might be actually more actionable than your value over the entire lifetime, however long that might be. But we should just be using different words for each of these different ideas. If we're talking about lifetime value, I'm talking about the amount of money you're going to spend from now until the end of eternity. you'll probably drop out before then. But I don't want to play God. I just want to say you could be around for another 100 years. It's unlikely, but we're not ruling that out. So lifetime value should be infinite horizon projected into the future. And even if you want a shorter horizon, like, let's say 5 years, we should be using the same models. We should just be kind of truncating the calculation instead of saying, oh, we're going to use this model for short horizon or that model for long horizon. That's just going to create a lot of confusion and inconsistent decision making.
Makes perfect sense to me. And then the last point was on this idea of like profitability versus revenue. And so you mentioned this idea of like how much are you spending with us? That sort of feels like a revenue number. And then there's the profit number of like adjusting for that. Are you supposed to be adjusting for the profit, or how do you think about, or what do you recommend that businesses are doing when they're trying to get to this PLTV number for their business?
See, you caught me, Michael. There you go. Me being sloppy again. It should definitely be a profit number. Now, there are some cases where it's either impossible to come up with the cost information, or there's a particular managerial question and all we care about is revenue. Okay, fine. But we should be putting a little asterisk next to that to know this is different. But ordinarily, we should totally be accounting for acquisition costs, and we can talk for days about what do we attribute to acquisition, and even the ongoing costs, both of the of producing the products and services, the ongoing care and feeding of the customers. Just it really should be variable profit, on a forward-looking basis. It's real careful about that. Again, I'll be kind of sloppy and sometimes move back and forth between profitability and revenue, even though I mean profitability. My co-founder, my co-author, my conscience, Dan McCarthy, then gives me the evil eye, saying, "Wait a minute, you sure you want to say that?"
We're big fans of Dan McCarthy on the podcast as well.
And so am I, because he's really not only kept me honest in this way here, but has just raised the bar in terms of how we do these calculations and the breadth of use cases that they apply to.
So the last background question that I have for you is, okay, we have this idea of PLTV. Like, what do businesses use it for? You alluded to this idea of sort of thinking about how you compare the value of the customer to the acquisition costs. But maybe if you give us the background on why do this calculation at all? What's the idea behind it? What are you using it for as a business?
Well, the answer is it should be everything that we do. Ordinarily, it is something as simple as acquisition. So, we're looking at the LTV to CAC ratio. So, what's it going to cost us to get this customer, and what is going to be their projected profitability? And hopefully, the latter is greater than the former by at least 3x. But it should impact everything else we do. We're about to do a customer experience campaign. Let's understand which kinds of customers participated in it and how much more valuable are they as a result of their participation. We're going to launch a new product. Let's look at the profitability of the customers who buy it before and after the launch of that product. Everything we do, we should be looking at through the lens of the profitability of the customers buying that thing, participating in that thing, engaging with that thing. And we tend to use it for a relatively limited set of cases, if we use it at all. And that's, again, back to Dan McCarthy, trying to make this stuff as relevant, salient, impactful to the CFO as it is to the CMO. That can drive a lot of very successful usage of it, and actually better scrutiny about the way that we calculate it, talk about it, share it with our different internal, external partners.
It's a wonderful summary. And this brings us to, I think, sort of the first meaty question that I had, which is, you've written a lot about PLTV and specifically this idea of customer centricity, right? Putting the customer and the customer's value at the forefront of everything, all the decisions you're making and how you're evaluating those decisions. One question that this raised for me is that it seems to contradict some of the recommendations from other business school professors and other people who opine on these types of subjects about doing a lot of brand-oriented mass market advertising, right? Reach as many customers as you can, versus this point of view, which seems to indicate focus on the most valuable customers. Are those ideas in conflict? If not, how do you square the circle? Maybe talk me through how you think about those competing ideas.
It's such an important point. I'm glad we're starting off with it. In some way, you answered the question as you asked the question. Okay, so if we go back, and we look at the recording, we'll say, what did Michael say? He said the customer, as if we can size up the customer. What is the lifetime value of the customer? What's it going to cost us to get and keep the customer? There is no the customer. There's this wide variety of customers that are wildly different from each other. And besides their tastes and their preferences and their use of social media, just in terms of their financial value that they bring to us, there's this incredible range. And so that's the difference, is that the folks who are going after kind of the pure reach mass marketing thing are quite happy, quite willing to talk about the customer and kind of play down, be ignorant about the nature, the extent of the heterogeneity, and say, let's just come up with the message for the product and sell it to the customer. And it turns out you will surely leave money on the table by understating and not catering to the differences across the customers. There's this vast array of differences. We know this going in. We understand that there's going to be some kind of 80-20 rule going on. So we should never talk about the customer, and recognizing that a tiny fraction of our customers bring a disproportionate amount of the value. They might bring all of the profitability. We got to treat them differently. Now, just because we're going to focus on them doesn't mean we're going to ignore the others. Doesn't mean that we're going to force all those others to comply with the same kinds of tactics that we use for the great customers. So to me, you're running two companies at once, and this is how we square the circle. First and foremost, we're going to look to those really valuable customers and say, how are they different? How do they use our product? How do they talk about our product? What was different about the way that we acquired them? And then how can we create more value for them, acquire more customers like them? That's where growth comes from. But again, that's just a fraction of the customer base. And then for everybody else, the reach kind of thing, the how brands grow from our good friend Byron Sharp, he's right about all that. That getting broader reach and thinking about the fact that if we have broader reach or penetration, that's going to drive greater frequency and all of that stuff. That's true. That's true. It's great. I'm a big supporter of it. But that's not going to create the kind of breakthrough growth that our investors expect or demand. That's going to keep the lights on. But then we got to look to those valuable customers for the real breakthrough growth.
I've got like a million follow-up questions. Let's talk about breakthrough growth. So is your point that the breakthrough growth comes from finding more really valuable customers, or from getting more out of the customers that you already have that are these high value customers?
Love it, love it. Of course, the kind of obvious and shallow answer is both. But if we have that incremental dollar to spend, should we spend it on fattening up the existing customers or acquiring new, more valuable customers? Definitely going to be the latter. So at the margin, we want to focus more on acquisition. And by the way, we don't want our acquisition to be efficient. Woo! I don't like efficiency, because efficiency means cheap. Efficiency means, focusing more on cost than on value. If I can make lifetime value as visible, as visceral, as tangible as the costs, and so let's spend pretty much whatever it takes to find some of those super valuable customers. So I'm willing to sacrifice efficiency for effectiveness. And this is where a lot of that conundrum lies, because a lot of that mass market stuff, it really is about efficiency. Let's come up with either channels or media platforms where we can get the word out there as broadly as possible, as cheaply as possible. And again, that's just great for those rank and file so-so customers. But for the high-end customers, stop being such a friggin' cheapskate, because you get what you pay for. And if you're smart about how you allocate those acquisition dollars, you can get just incredible returns on them. So that's why I don't even like the LTV to CAC ratio, because once again, it's an average. I want to know how we doing at the high end, how we doing at the lower end, how is the mix for this next group of customers compared to the mix that we got with the last group. That's the key.
One immediate question that jumped to mind as you were talking about this is, does this vary by brand, right? Like the idea of really highly differentiated LTVs, I think really resonates with me when I think about, complex, more expensive products maybe versus like a mass market, Coke, right? Just to give the sort of default example of a mass market brand. Is this the same for all brands? Or do different brands, like, does the variance here and the degree to which it matters how well you target these different customers with their different values vary across different brands? Or do different brands need to think about this differently?
So again, I'm going to give you the wishy-washy yes and no. It doesn't really vary by brand per se. You pick the most beloved, valuable brand in the world, Apple. I have never bought an Apple product. Okay, so for any brand, there's going to be a bunch of people who just never, ever, ever use it, and there's a bunch of people who just, that's all they do, not just buying that brand, but getting its logo tattooed on their body parts and telling everyone about it. So for any given brand, no matter how commoditized it might seem to be, there's still going to be incredible heterogeneity. There's going to be some people all in, some people never in. So for brands, no, there's just lots and lots of heterogeneity. But here's how it does vary. It's less about the brand per se, more about the nature of the business model. So is this some kind of contractual setting, some kind of subscription arrangement, enterprise SaaS, insurance policy, beer of the month club, where the transactions are happening on a very regular basis? There's observable churns, like, okay, I'm out of here now. The amount that you spend is pretty much the same. Or is it some kind of, crazy, unstructured, non-contractual thing where you can, play that game, go to that store, use that, cosmetic product, multiple times a day and then go years without it, where the purchasing is just crazy spread out, not only across people, but even for a given person. And so that distinction, the contractual versus the non-contractual, and then what kinds of subtleties that I have within each of those buckets, that's what matters most. It's just the nature of the relationship between the company selling the product or service and the buyers who buy it. That's what I care more about. Is this a big, strong brand or not? Is this B2B or B2C? That stuff is largely overrated.
But so let's dig into that more. So contractual versus non-contractual, like what are the implications, right? If you're talking to a non-contractual brand, is it like, oh, this is, the predicted LTV is just harder to measure and harder to estimate? Or like, what is the sort of advice in terms of how they should be thinking about their customer lifetime value?
Yeah, so it is much harder to estimate, much harder to manage. Because for all three reasons that I mentioned before, in the contractual setting, we have observable attrition. We know when the customer goes away. There's no doubt about whether they're alive or not. The purchases tend to be, relatively periodically spaced out and for the same amount. They have it easy. That's why when you learn about lifetime value in your, marketing 101 class or in some blog post or white paper, always they focus on the contractual setting. And so the problem is for the non-contractuals, they try to, here we go, square peg, round hole it, to say, well, if we're Home Depot, what is our retention rate? Well, in the non-contractual setting, it makes no sense. Retention, if you think about that word, only matters in a contractual setting where we have this group of people and how many of them have renewed with us. In the non-contractual, just because I didn't buy anything from Home Depot this week or month or even year, doesn't mean I'm gone. It just means I'm a light buyer. I'll be back when my kid needs to move again. And so it's just much, much harder to get your arms around the non-contractual setting, which, by the way, is 10 times more common than the contractual setting. And so it's really important to appreciate the distinction. And at some point to say, you know what, I can't use the contractual models in the non-contractual setting. I'm going to have to come up with the right model when these purchases are all kind of wonky and spaced out. And that's what I've been doing for most of these 39 years. Coming up with LTV models for all settings, but the non-contractual, because of its difficulty, because of its much more common presence, and just the need for companies to better manage these kind of more kind of random, chaotic customers, let's get those models right and let's talk nonstop about them. So I definitely tip much in that direction, kind of overemphasizing the non-contractual because the world needs it more.
Makes perfect sense. I'm gonna try to channel how brands grow and ask you some questions that I think Professor Sharp might ask. Apologies to him if this isn't quite right. But one of the, I think, points in the book was that, for any given category, you have sort of a distribution of like frequency of purchasers. You've got heavy buyers and medium buyers and low buyers, and what determines sort of the success of a brand is like their distribution, right? So if someone wants a fizzy beverage and goes to the corner store, they're going to have, if they're a heavy buyer, they're going to continue to buy heavily in the stuff that's available, and if they're not, then they're not. And so that's why how brands grow tends to put a lot of emphasis on this idea of like availability, right? Specifically physical availability, but also the idea of mental availability.
So for the so-so customers, which is to say most of the customer base, that's absolutely right. Again, I might be the strongest, most vocal advocate for how brands grow in the Ehrenberg Bass Institute in the entire Western Hemisphere. But once again, Michael, you answered the question the way you asked the question. The models that they build are static. Those models that they build are stationary. In fact, the models that I build are the same exact models, but with this dynamic layer on top. The idea that customers change, especially over a long horizon. So over a short horizon, you have your propensity to buy. Sometimes you buy a lot, sometimes you buy a little, but you're wiggling and jiggling around, a certain buying propensity. We agree completely on that. But over the long run, and the forefather of all of the how brands grow, a gentleman by the name of Andrew Ehrenberg, would make this whole big deal that it's actually a leaky bucket. And he's right, that the customers fade away, the customers go away. And so the main models that I build, it's the same models that our friends down at the University of South Australia will build, but adding this dynamic layer. We call it buy till you die. Their models are buy and keep buying at that same steady rate. Turns out that when you allow for dropout to occur, and it always does, no matter how good your brand is, that starts to bend the curves a little bit, literally and figuratively. And it makes those high value customers disproportionately more valuable than the low value customers. Whereas in Byron's static world, those lines are flat. And, someone who bought from you, twice as often as someone else in the past is going to be twice as valuable in the future. That's not true. And so over long runs, you start to see differences. So it doesn't in any way change my love for doing that kind of mental physical availability thing for the majority of our customers. Shout loud, shout often, keep it efficient. But for the high-end customers, you got to view them differently. You got to measure them differently. You got to manage them differently. And there's more growth potential through that piece of it. There might only be a fraction of the business, but there's more growth potential there. It's a bit more under your control.
Great answer. I believe this is the last question I have, although I might keep digging in. So we talk about these high value customers, and especially, again, I'm thinking about like a retail setting where you're going into the grocery store or going into the corner store and buying something. How do we actually identify and target these customers, right? Especially if I don't have like a direct relationship, like via some direct to consumer website or buying pattern. Like, do we have the ability to do that at all? If I'm Coke, like, how do I figure out who my heavy buyers are and then actually go after them? Even if, let's say I agree with this idea, and I'm like, yes, I absolutely want to do this, but like who and how do I actually target them?
I got a range of reasons for you, 39 years of reasons. One is just the fact that our ability to do that kind of targeting and tagging and tracking is just so much greater than it ever was before. It's tougher today since Apple kind of pulled the rug out from under our whole ecosystem, and then things like GDPR, just a dumb idea, but just makes life more difficult. But still, companies started to think about things like loyalty programs and mobile apps and just ways to get customers to opt in, to be willing to be tracked, to recognize that it's actually in their best interest to do so. We're just getting better at that. And a lot of the sky is falling, privacy, creepy stuff is not really happening nearly as much as people think. So part of it is for companies to incentivize their customers to raise their hand when they purchase or interact. But that's not all. There'll be, of course, third-party services that will do some of that. But even if you don't have any of that data, a lot of the work that we'll do, a lot of the work that Dan and I do, we might have purely aggregated data, and we could still come up with that distribution of value for a given cohort of customers. So I'm not necessarily into the whole one-to-one targeting thing. Again, on this front, I agree quite a bit with Byron Sharp and how brands grow, but I am into trying to make each subsequent cohort of customers a little bit better, a slightly better mix than the one before. So we might not know who the specific individuals are, but if we find that we're getting just a few more of those higher value customers, let's do more of that. Even if we can't get in there and do anything with any kind of personalization to it. It's surprising how much insight we can draw even from aggregated data, and how much actionability we have, even if we can't tag and track individuals.
As I expected, I have more follow-up questions now. Can you talk tactically about like some of these tactics? You said you incentivize customers to raise their hands. How did what are those some of tactics that people do, and then what do people actually do with that? Is it like the thing that jumps to my mind that I think probably wouldn't actually work is just like, oh, we'll get their email address and we'll send them more coupons. But that doesn't seem like the right way to do this. Right. So what is the right way to do this?
Yeah, it turns out that and the other kind of obvious answer would be demographics or personas. Let's do some qualitative research, which I tend to be a big fan of. It's just that it's used badly. And let's figure out our three. Yeah, we understand there's not one kind of customer. We have three kinds of customers. We have Busy Betty, Carpool Carla, and Working Wanda. And we're going to come up with different messages for each of them. So we're going to send them different coupons based on their demographic. No, let's not do that. I find that surface level characteristics, demographics, tend not to be very predictive, tend not to be very robust in their ability to characterize the higher value customers. It tends to be more behavioral stuff. Tell me about the acquisition process. Tell me what channel, what kind of campaign we acquired you through. Tell me what kinds of products were in the first basket that you bought from us. So a lot of the stuff that we have easy access to it ends up being not only more actionable, but more predictive as well on an enduring longer term basis. So a lot of acquisition characteristics are the things that I prefer to leverage over demographics, even if I could mess with the demographics.
And so we're using that, and then again, like, what are some ideas of the tactics that you might do with this? Is it just sending coupons, or are there other things that brands should be thinking about to have in their armory?
So we got to get outside of just the narrow range of kind of 4Ps thinking. So for instance, let's find out which products tend to be disproportionately associated with our higher value customers. This goes back to the how brands grow thing. If you look at the products that you sell the most of, those are going to be the products, because of mental and physical availability, that you sell to the so-so customers. So our best-selling products tend to be bought disproportionately by the not great customers. But somewhere down the list, there's going to be some products that we look at and go, yeah, they're middle of the pack. But my God, that they have this amazing ability to kind of pull high value customers in and to hold on to those high value customers. So the first thing we need to do is to look at our product through the lens of not just how much we sell of each one, but what's the profitability of the customers who buy that product. And once we find out which of those flagship products, again, in terms of customer profitability, let's do more of that. Let's promote those products more. Let's come up with more products like those. Let's kind of make them the heroes that they should be. And not necessarily putting all of our eggs in one basket with them either, but spending disproportionately more on those kinds of products, whether it is through R&D, through messaging, and different kinds of distribution.
I want to talk a little bit about the way that businesses implement these models. I talk to a lot of businesses, a lot of data scientists or marketing scientists working in industry, and I talk to a lot of them that have built different types of predictive LTV models. And one sort of problem or issue that I've seen crop up a number of times is these businesses will have fairly complex models for doing predictive LTV. And so they'll have a bunch of data scientists, they'll have a big machine learning model with lots of different variables feeding into it that will predict LTV scores across their customer base. But then they'll re-estimate it and the numbers will change, and that causes a lot of consternation and confusion internally. I wanted to sort of get your thoughts. What's going on here? Are they doing something wrong? Is this normal and expected? Like, what have you seen?
Yes. I just put out a LinkedIn post yesterday, which of course I'll share with you, and you can share with all the listeners here. Yet another paper by some academics in Canada. I've never heard of them. Doesn't matter. Where they did a little bake-off between a kind of a classic ML model and the more probabilistic models that I like to develop. And I know we'll double click on that. And it turns out that these simple probabilistic models that have many fewer parameters, that are very, very easy to estimate, they're incredibly scalable, kick ass when it comes to the predictive validity. That ML should be icing on the cake. And again, I'm happy to talk about that, but it shouldn't be the cake itself. For all the reasons that you said, they're going to be overly complicated. They're not scalable. They're not robust. So you get a little bit more data. It's like the parameters change quite a bit. Whereas in my world, if I'm talking to, let's say, some kind of non-contractual company, a retailer, I don't need to see any data. I know exactly what model I'm going to run. That's not only how confident I am, but that's a testament to the robustness of these models, that we don't need to do a lot of bespoke fine tuning to figure out what's going on in this case. I want to make a life as simple as possible, both in terms of the specification of the model and the limited range of models that we need for the different kinds of business settings. So put those machine learning toys away, or at least wait to use them until you've built the first level simple probabilistic model, and then bring in the ML just to kind of explain the wiggles and jiggles around the baselines that our simpler models will provide.
I love the answer. I want to dig into a bunch of these concepts and really just understand like what you mean. So you talked about sort of machine learning in contrast to a probabilistic model. Can you tell me about like what that means? How do you think about those being different or similar? Like what does that mean in your mind?
Yeah, so there's this big distinction in the ML world between discriminative models, basically putting people in buckets. Are you going to churn next period? Are you going to buy next period? Are you going to refer anyone next period? ML is great for discriminative tasks like that. Okay, really, 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 really good. But I don't build discriminative models. I build generative models. And it's kind of ironic because, we've now been using that G word quite a bit these days, chat GPT, right? I'm not sure whether the LLMs really are generative models or not. I'm not going to even get involved in that debate. But the models that I build are surely generative. I don't need any data to build them. I'm just going to tell a story, a probabilistic story, an as if random story about how people behave, how they differ from each other, how they change over time. After I've told my story, I'll bring in just enough data, limited amounts of data, to bring that story to life, to give me the specific parameters. And then the story will be astonishingly robust. And here's a great example of it. As an undergraduate at MIT nearly 50 years ago, I was studying to become an actuary. And the actuaries are really, really, really good. Now, they're not any good at saying, how old are you going to be when you die? Okay, that's a bit more of a discriminative task. They're going to say, what percent of people who share the same relevant behavioral characteristics as you? I'm looking at you, Michael. I'm thinking, jumping out of airplanes, smoking cigars, riding motorcycles. Okay.
Not that exciting, unfortunately.
But what percent of people who share the relevant behavioral characteristics will live to be 85 years old? And so we want to tell these probabilistic stories. And so the models that I build are what are known as buy till you die models. Again, these are the ones we use in the non-contractual setting. And it basically says you have two coins. You have your buy coin, which varies across people, and you flip it every period, should I buy or not? And again, on this basis, completely agree with Byron Sharp and others that different people have different buying propensities. Yay. But we have the second coin, the death coin. This is where the dynamics come in. And every period, before you even have the privilege of flipping the will I buy or not coin, you flip the death coin. Will I even live another day to contemplate making another purchase? So we tell this brutally harsh on and off story, buy till you die. And even though that sounds a bit unrealistic, it sounds like you would think that people work their way more to kind of a gradual, soft landing. It's just shocking. And if you think about your own behavior, how often, for reasons that might be random, they might be forced upon you, or they might be your preferences, you just stop doing something. You either switch to another brand, you leave the category, you move to a different geography, you literally die. And so these BTYD models, buy till you die, I didn't even invent them. They were invented by mentors of mine back in 1987. I just kind of stumbled into them right around the turn of the century and almost begrudgingly, didn't really want to. And oh my God, these things are good. And I've spent now a quarter century just kind of pushing them and trying to get people to understand what they are, their implications, the contrast with, and sometimes the synergy with machine learning. But the problem is for every one of me and my students, there's 10,000 ML people being hatched every day. It's an uphill battle. And so we're really trying to make kind of kumbaya noise with them. Yeah, we like the ML stuff. We really do. The commercial work that we do with Theta, the models that we pretentiously call CLV Ultra, it's a body of die model with machine learning on top to explain whatever's left over that our models can't pick up. And that's a dynamite combination that really is the best of all worlds. And the predictive ability, the diagnostics that emerge from it, and the actions that we can take are both wow, as well as very, very different than the ones we would do off of a pure ML model. So it really does matter.
I wanted to sort of go back. You mentioned a couple of words here that I thought were interesting, like the idea of predictive validity and robustness, especially when you were contrasting the sort of the core probabilistic model versus the ML approaches. Can you talk a little bit more about like what do those mean and why are those important in the context of using these tools in a business context?
It's so important. I appreciate the chance to double click on it. So first of all, in terms of robustness, again, you said it yourself. In the ML world, a little bit more data comes in. We rerun this big complicated model and a lot changes because those models are so heavily dependent on whatever explanatory variables you put in, including things like demographics, behavior as well, and where you are in the social graph and your media habits. And you need all that stuff in there. And as that stuff changes, it's a pain in the ass to measure and track it all. And as that stuff changes, the ML model itself is going to change quite a bit. Whereas these body die models are just astonishingly robust, and we'll run them over ever longer, or better yet, shorter periods, and the parameters barely budge. That's one of the beautiful things about having a generative model, a story that you can believe in, instead of one that you're kind of making up every time out. So robustness in terms of how much data we're using, in terms of its insensitivity to outliers. If you have some customers in there that are they're duplicates or they're third-party businesses that are reselling, and we never throw outliers out when we build the models. We just say, shit happens. There's just a lot of randomness. There's this long right tail. We're okay with that. Robustness to missing data. So yeah, robustness matters so much and doesn't get enough credit. And then there's the predictive validity. And very often ML models will do just as well, if not better, in terms of just an overall tracking plot. Let's just look at a group of customers and just how many purchases will they make. And yeah, but we want to drill down a little bit deeper. Even if we're not going to play the one-to-one marketing game, we still want to use the data at the customer level to validate the models. And so my favorite two words, my students' favorite two words are conditional expectations. So conditional on what you've done in the past, the fact that you made 3 purchases in the past, let's look at all the other people who made 3 purchases and say, what are they going to do in the future? So we want to look at our model separately for the light buyers, the heavy buyers, really understand, can it pick up the difference across them, not just the average across them. And this is very often where the ML models fall apart. It will do very well for an average customer, but won't be able to capture the range of heterogeneity that is so important, not just technically, but managerially.
Super helpful, super clear, makes perfect sense. A lot of ideas now kicking around in my head on how to think about this. The last section that I want to get into to talk about here is, maybe a little bit of LinkedIn drama, but I want to bring it to our listeners. In large part due to your work, customer lifetime value and this sort of estimation has gotten very popular. I think people broadly, marketers, business people, they understand this idea. And as might be expected, there's been some pushback to that. And I've seen people post on LinkedIn or wherever and being like, don't use LTV, it'll lead you astray. And I'm curious, I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on that. Like, what are they getting wrong? What are the common misconceptions here? What are people missing when they're, other than just like trying to get a bunch of views on LinkedIn, which is maybe what's happening?
So for one thing, if you're using bad LTV models, you're going to get bad outcomes. And as popular as my stuff has been, it really is just a tiny fraction. It's still just a whisper into the wind compared to a lot of the other.
Well, so what are the bad LTV models? But that's actually a great topic.
Straight up machine learning. We're just gonna, we're gonna collect everything about our customers and throw it into some kind of, deep neural net transformer, whatever it might be. I don't even care much. And it's going to work really, really well, either for discriminative statements, will this customer buy from us next period or not, and or over short periods of time. When we want to go over long horizons and we want to drill down to individual kinds of customers, they will fall apart. So part of it is methodological, but part of it would be the actions that companies take. And you know what? And I could be as guilty as anyone here. We first commercialized these models, a company called Zodiac. We sold that company to Nike. And then Nike dug itself into a hole by misusing our models. And you look at Nike, that for the first couple of years after they bought Zodiac, they were doing great, exceeding kind of Wall Street expectations every quarter. The new CEO took over, John Donahue, and he said, you know what, we're going to use this LTV stuff. You know what? We're going to look at our different channels of distribution. We're going to find out which ones give us kind of, low lifetime value, like Amazon. People buying Nikes through Amazon, not very valuable. You know what? We're not going to sell through Amazon anymore. And at first, I was like celebrating this, saying, yeah, great. Wow, they really listen to us. Wow, they're taking bold action. But that's actually really dumb, really dumb. And they've been paying the price dearly for that. So sometimes it's taking these models and putting all your eggs in one basket or ignoring those so-so customers that make up the bulk of your customer base. So maybe you should manage those low-value channels a little bit differently. Don't put the good stuff through there. Don't spend as much money advertising them, but you can't cut them off completely. And again, that's why a lot of the how brands grow stuff is so essential, that you still need that bulk of customers just to, make payroll and stay solvent. But so it's finding that right balance to use the lifetime value models to find the growth opportunities, but instead of using it as a basis to cut. That's a big distinction right there.
I want to dig into this more. What are other ways that you've seen the idea of lifetime value be misused?
Well, again, we can look at our high lifetime value customers. I tend to focus on more behavioral distinctions, products they buy, what channels we acquire them through, what kinds of campaigns they respond to. But it is tempting to look for demographics as well. So we'll have a lot of companies come to us saying, I hear you talk about demographics, but we want to know anyway, for these customers that we bought this period, that we acquired this period, how do the demographics distinguish the high value from the low value ones? And we'll go, well, we'd rather not tell you that. And they said, do you want to get paid? Okay, we'll tell you. And here they are. But the problem is those demographics are not, those demographic kind of relationships are not very robust. And so, we can give you the answer that explained the demographic differences between the good and bad customers this period, but they're not going to persist into the next period. So if you do too much slicing and dicing like that, you're going to find some differences that are you're just kind of capitalizing on noise, but you're taking it as gospel truth and making decisions.
And so what happens there is the brand is like, oh yeah, it's women in the Southwest who have purple cars, and so we're going to target our advertising to them, and they like over pivot. Is that
exactly? They over pivot, and then what do they do when the results come up disappointing next period? They throw out the whole lifetime value thing. They throw out the baby with the bathwater, saying, we shouldn't have done that lifetime value thing. We'll just get back to just, shouting real loud, or back to influencers. Yeah, influencers. So The chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and there's no doubt that whether you have a bad lifetime value model or a good lifetime value model that you use badly, it just seems like, because it is such a new idea, there's a lot of people out there who are almost wanting it to fail because then it lets them go back to kind of the business as usual that they were familiar with when they were in business school 40 years ago. And again, part of this is sometimes my fault for maybe not being as clear as I can be about the use cases, giving people caution, don't do that. But I think a lot of it is just companies are just kind of reaching for kind of short-term fixes instead of the longer term ones.
Well, ain't that the truth? And I think that's a really good note for us to end on. Professor Fader, I could ask you a million more questions for 4 or 6 more hours, but want to be respectful of your time and just say thank you. Thanks. I thought this was a really wonderful conversation. We got deep into the weeds. Yeah, thanks for joining me, and it was great to have you.
Sure thing, Mike. I appreciate the questions. I love all the things that you and the Recast team are doing, and I'm glad to keep the conversation going.
Great. Well, until next time, Professor Fader, thank you.